Say what you will about the quality of its battle droids, but the CIS army certainly had style. Of the four main factions of the Star Wars saga, the Separatists had the most unique aesthetic, which included a variety of fantastical and unorthodox vehicles. This was embodied by the STAP, which served as the droid army's equivalent of the speeder bikes employed by most other military forces. But these airhooks couldn't have looked more different from the likes of the 74Z speeder bike and bark speeder, and that's not just because their pilots rode them standing up. In this video, we'll be taking a close look at these versatile vehicles and their role in the Separatist war machine.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The core of the CIS droid army was based on the Trade Federation droid army, which had been assembled just prior to the Battle of Naboo with the help of Baktoid Armor Workshop and Ha'or Chal Engineering. This matters because, unlike most armies, this means the various components of the droid army were all designed around the same time and were designed to work together. We've discussed in past videos how beautifully efficient this system was and how it lent itself naturally to organization and rank structure. The core assets of the droid army were built around the deployment of hordes of B-1 battle droids. Baktoid Armor Workshop designed MTTs and PACs to carry companies of them into battle, while Ha'or Chal built C-9979 landing craft to carry them to planetary surfaces. Both companies also worked on escorts for the various components of this system, with Ha'or Chal coming up with the Vulture droid to escort its landers and Baktoid designing the AAT to escort its troop carriers. All of these components were controlled by a central control computer housed aboard an orbiting battle ship, which managed the whole army and gave it coordination on par with Jedi battle meditation. Then there was the STAP. Like the AAT, the STAP was designed by Baktoid Armor Workshop, but unlike all the aforementioned droid army vehicles, its niche wasn't nearly as evident. Sure, it was essentially a droid speeder bike, but the use of fast-moving speeders generally conflicted with the droid army's usual order of battle, which was built around vast infantry columns and slow-moving armored vehicles. But speeder bike tactics weren't the STAP's primary purpose, even though it could be used for them. STAPs had another niche in the droid army's order of battle. They were the eyes of the central control computer. In a standard engagement, STAPs would zoom around the battlefield, firing on targets of opportunity, but focusing on getting a clear, wide view of the action. The central control computer used the droids piloting its STAPs like flying cameras, and their input helped it coordinate the army and rapidly respond to enemy thrusts and retreats. Of course, this wasn't the only role the STAP played in the droid army. It was also regularly used for scouting, the pursuit of stray enemies, and for guarding landing sites while the army's heavier vehicles deployed. Now that we've got a good idea of its true purpose, let's take a look at the STAP's specs. The STAP was fundamentally an airhook, a fairly common speeder variant that was designed for standing operators. STAPs in particular were designed by use for B-1 battle droids, however, which allowed for several liberties to be taken with the design, since safety features weren't necessary. Thus, the STAP was smaller than most civilian airhooks, only 2 meters tall, and left its pilot almost entirely exposed. A STAP's droid pilot controlled the craft via a pair of steering handles and a pair of pedals. These were the pilot's only points of contact with the vehicle, so when the STAP was flying at high speed, it could look like the droid was just barely hanging on for dear life. But this wasn't quite the case. The STAP's pedals were designed to magnetically lock onto the droid's feet, which kept the droid operator securely in place. Like all airhooks, the STAP was a repulsor lift vehicle, kept aloft by an anti-gravity projector housed below the pedals. STAPs tended to float much higher off the ground than your average speeder bike, which was by design. They were, after all, intended to give their pilots bird's-eye views of battlefields. STAPs were propelled forwards by a pair of drive turbines mounted above the foot panel, between which were the craft's reactor and power cells. These could propel the STAP forward at up to 400 km per hour, but this speed came at a cost. The STAP's thrusters gave off intense amounts of radiation when at full burn, which could seriously sicken or even kill any organic pilots. This wasn't a problem for the droid army, as battle droids had no issue with large doses of radiation, but it made the STAP a hazardous choice for organic pilots, though some sources have shown organics piloting STAPs for limited periods anyway. For such a small craft, it was pretty well armoured, but it still didn't take much to shoot one of these air hooks out of the sky, so STAPs tended to rely on their speed and manoeuvrability to stay intact. It was also well armed, boasting a pair of repeating blaster cannons mounted on the craft's head. These blasters were about as powerful as a droideca's, and they had a slightly higher rate of fire. This allowed STAPs to devastate squads of infantry and enemy speeder bikes, but they struggled against anything larger, though with precise fire, they were known to be able to cripple much larger vehicles. All told, the STAP was a very versatile craft, and it was limited only by its reliance on the rest of the droid army. The STAP's high voltage power cells were only good for a few hours, after which the STAP would have to recharge at the nearest C997 landing craft or a Separatist facility with the appropriate recharging cradles. Thus, STAPs were rarely deployed on long-range missions, restricted to medium-range scouting or hunting and short-range escort and patrol functions. Like the rest of the Trade Federation droid army, the STAP first saw use in the invasion of Naboo. These craft were first deployed from the Trade Federation's landing craft when they touched down in Naboo's jungles, and STAPs initially served to guard the droid army's landing sites and perform short-range scouting, while the landing craft disgorged their tanks and troop carriers. Other STAPs pursued the Jedi that had snuck aboard the landing craft, escorted the army's heavier vehicles during the assault on Theed, and acted as eyes in the skies for the central control computer during the Battle of Naboo. After the Battle of Naboo, the STAP didn't see all that much action for a long time, but it saw a resurgence with the outbreak of the Clone Wars, this time as part of the CIS droid army. But during the Clone Wars, the STAP was greatly reduced in prominence, mainly for two reasons. Firstly, the CIS droid army had a much broader variety of combat vehicles than the Trade Federation army did, with the private armies of other corporate factions supplying many vehicles that crowded out the niches formerly ruled by the AAT and STAP. Secondly, unlike the Trade Federation droid army, the CIS wasn't as reliant on central control computers. It used them often to provide greater coordination, but its battle droids were nonetheless capable of operating on their own. With the central control computer much less vital to the success of the droid army, the use of the STAPs waned. When they saw deployment, it was typically in the role of conventional speeder bikes, which, again, didn't mesh all that well with standard droid army strategies. Most of the time, STAPs made appearances as part of the Trade Federation army units that hadn't been fully integrated with the rest of the droid army's arsenal. Early in the war, such Trade Federation units were fairly common, as the droid army didn't properly integrate until General Grievous took command and reorganized it from the ground up. Thus, STAPs made regular appearances during the war's earliest campaigns, the Hunt for the Decimator and the Dark Reaper Crisis, as well as the Battle of Kartau and the Battle of Pengalan. Later in the war, STAPs also appeared in the Battle of Christosis, the Battle of Teth, the Battle of Ryloth, the Battle of Lola Seyu, and the Battle of Florum. An additional notable appearance on Naboo tipped the Republic off to the presence of a hidden Separatist base on the planet, preventing the release of the Blue Shadow virus back into the galaxy. As the Clone Wars went on, however, the STAPs slowly started to disappear from active use, as the Separatists opted to use more suitable light vehicles. By the time of the Outer Rim sieges, the STAP was an uncommon sight. So that's our look at the STAP, one of the most memorable Trade Federation war machines. But what do you think? What are your thoughts on this memorable Separatist speeder? Let us know in the comments section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.